It happened on a cold Sunday evening in November, the kind of day that felt like it had already made peace with darkness before the sun even set. The windows were fogged from the inside, the fire in the hearth low and whispering, and the smell of old pages lingered in the corners of the room. Leela was cleaning, not out of necessity, but out of restlessness, the way people do when they're trying not to think too much. She had only meant to tidy up his study, a space he rarely touched anymore. Boxes stacked carelessly, drawers that stuck when you opened them too fast, notes scribbled in margins of books whose titles no longer made sense. She moved with care, not wanting to disturb anything important, telling herself she was helping, telling herself that closeness sometimes meant rearranging the chaos the other person didn't know how to deal with. That's when she found it. In the third drawer from the bottom, beneath a stack of faded postcards and a broken watch with no strap, there it was, a wedding ring. No box, no inscription, just a thin band of gold, smooth, a little dull, resting in the dust like it had been waiting. Her breath caught. She picked it up slowly, half expecting it to be something else entirely, something less meaningful. But it wasn't. She could tell by the weight of it. Real gold, worn, familiar to someone's hand. She turned it over in her fingers again and again, then looked toward the hallway, half expecting to hear footsteps. Nothing. Silence, except for the occasional crackle from the fire. Lila sat down on the edge of the armchair. Her fingers closed around the ring, and for a long moment, she didn't move. He wasn't married. She knew that. She had met his mother, helped him repaint his kitchen, seen the inside of his medicine cabinet. They had shared passwords, bank pins, entire weekends where they barely touched their phones. There had been no signs, no hesitation, no red flags. But the ring made everything feel like a half-truth. She placed it back, exactly where she found it, pressed flat beneath the postcards, and closed the drawer with careful hands. She didn't mention it that night, or the next. She tried to let it go, but it followed her in the quiet moments, in the space between sentences, in the shadow that crossed her face when he looked away. Days passed. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe it was a family heirloom. Maybe it had belonged to his father or a friend. But the voice in her mind whispered louder each day. Then why hide it? One night, they were sitting on the floor in front of the fire, a record playing softly in the background. She was curled up beside him, the back of her hand brushing his as they passed a mug of tea between them. She looked over at him, studied the lines near his eyes, the scar just above his left eyebrow, the familiar curve of his mouth when he was deep in thought. And before she could stop herself, the words came out. "I found something in your drawer," she said, voice even, soft. He didn't ask which drawer. He didn't need to. Instead, he shifted slightly, leaned forward, and rested his arms on his knees. He took a long breath, and she could see in his expression, not guilt, but something quieter. Regret, maybe, or memory. "I kept it because I couldn't quite let it go," he said at last. "It's not what you think." Leela didn't interrupt. She just waited. "It belonged to someone I once loved," he continued. "We weren't married. We didn't even get engaged. But I bought the ring. I was going to ask her. I thought I was sure." His voice was low now, almost like he was telling it to the fire. "But something didn't feel right. Not with her. With me. I was chasing an idea, not a person. I didn't propose. We ended things soon after. I never returned the ring." He looked over at her. "I've kept it all this time. Not because I wanted to remember her, but because I needed to remember who I was when I almost made the wrong promise." Leela felt her chest tighten. Her fingers curled into her sleeve. "You should have told me," she said. "I know," he said, "but I wasn't ready." They sat in silence for a long time after that. Not the sharp kind that cuts between two people, but the heavy, hovering kind that simply asks to be held. The fire had burned lower now, the embers glowing soft and slow. Leela looked at the shadows playing on the wall, her heart pulling in two directions, toward the honesty he'd finally offered, and toward the ache of knowing it hadn't come sooner. "I wasn't hiding her," he said after a while, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was hiding from the version of myself who thought love had to be earned with grand gestures and unspoken fears." Lila turned to face him, her gaze steady. "And what version are you now?" He didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his hands, the ones she knew so well, the way they held books too tightly, the way they brushed her back when she walked past him in the kitchen, the way they stilled when he was trying not to say too much. "I'm still learning," he said, "still figuring out how to be the man who doesn't need to hide parts of his past to feel worthy of his present." Lila stood and walked to the bookshelf across the room. She ran her fingers along the spines, the way she always did when she was thinking too hard. Then she turned, leaning gently against the shelves. "I don't need perfection," she said. "I don't need your past rewritten or cleaned up for my comfort. But I do need all of you here, not just the parts you think I'll approve of." His eyes met hers. The room felt still in that moment, like even the air had paused to listen. "I want to be that person," he said, "for you, with you." There was a long pause, and then she walked toward him slowly, sat beside him again, and took his hand. She didn't say it was okay. She didn't say it didn't hurt. What she said was truer than either. "Then let's start here." And they did. Over the next few weeks, things felt different. Not broken, just restitched in new places. There was care in how they spoke, tenderness in how they paused mid-conversation to check the other's eyes. They were more deliberate, less assuming, sometimes quiet, sometimes raw, but always somehow more real. One night, Leela found herself back in the study, this time searching for a book she had loved as a child. As she opened the same drawer, her eyes landed on the ring again, still there, still quiet. She picked it up and held it in her palm, this time without tension, without question. And then, almost without thinking, she carried it to the kitchen where he was making tea. "I think you should do something with it," she said. He looked at her, unsure. "Not because it's a problem," she added, "but because maybe it's time." He nodded, took the ring, and placed it on the counter between them. "I'll figure out what that means." A week later, it was gone. He never said what he did with it. She never asked. And that silence felt like its own kind of answer. One evening, months later, Lila opened her drawer to find a small envelope. Inside, a note in his handwriting. "Not all rings are for endings. Some are just pauses. And some people are the story after the silence. No signature, no explanation, just that. And for her, it was enough."